So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another one of the siege battles that has been given to me by Winged Swordsman 44, so a big thank you to him. And today we are going to be seeing the elves, the High Elves in particular, a union of Imladris and Lindon, take on an attacking force. And it is rather interesting because this is a map we have seen several times before, albeit not for quite a while. And also, most of the time we've seen this particular map in the past, we've seen the defenders essentially defend the other side of it, even though this is the side with the bigger settlement, so this is clearly where the elves are going to be attempting to dig in, but there are a few ways the attackers can get at them. First and foremost, of course, down here. This is probably the most obvious route in, but it does involve having to go uphill against a fortified position. The other is along this side of the map over here, but it is narrow, it is a rather big trench, and considering it is the elves that you're having to attack into, you're going to take a lot of damage going down a rather narrow point like that. There is another potential route you could take, but it is quite a long trek for you if you're the attackers. One attacking army can choose to go all the way around and then attack across this narrow bridge over here, which isn't too appealing, but by the time an attacking army is attacking via this route, the other two positions will also be being pushed, and of course it is always best to try and maximise how many positions you're attacking at once. But we'll go through the attackers first and foremost before we start talking about the elven defenders. And we shall start off with Mevin, who is playing as Rhun. Rhun, again, because of the melee defense and damage the elves can dish out, Rhun's advantage with their armor piercing is not going to be quite as big as it would otherwise be, but they should still be a useful, well-rounded attacking force, and the armor piercing will certainly not go to waste against Imladris. It may do against Lindon, but that's a different matter. Scion Rim are a very bulky unit of spears, so they're going to be very much a hoe in taking damage in this kind of situation. We've also got some Variag mercenaries over here with the armor upgrade. I mean, again, if you're going to be the attackers, you're going to need to skirmish with the enemy at least a little bit, I would suggest, and Rhun can do that, maybe not to as high a standard as the elves can, especially with superior positions. You can't even make use of the fact that Lindon have got lower armour, because they're going to be able to shoot you first in pretty much every situation. Crossbows with the armour upgrade, it will help mitigate the damage that those elven arrows will undoubtedly be trying to do to them. Having said that, crossbows are still one of the things which, even though they do have an armour piercing focus, it doesn't really matter. Like, the stopping power is such that any units you start hitting with them consistently are going to start falling away very quickly. Low Gamperin, so an anchor to your front line, a phalanx anchor like this is always going to be very useful. Lindon are fairly focused around pikes, and Imladris do have a unit of high tier pikes themselves, so it is going to be interesting to see how that particular dynamic works, but the Gamperin are really a no-brainer to bring in this kind of situation regardless of who you're facing off against, because they do offer you that nice backboard to your infantry. Fully upgraded E-Strong Clansman, going for a more numbers-focused approach as Rhun in this situation is not the worst idea, because the armour piercing of the Flag Room and your Carmel's units is not going to be as useful as it otherwise would be, so maybe you can allow your allies to lean into their qualities a little bit more, and you, on the other hand, can then go for a little bit more of your numbers. There are some Flag Rooms still here, but plenty of E-Strong Warriors and Clansmen as well. Now then, the second army is Hunter or Hunted. We've seen him a couple of times lately, so it does seem like the same group of players really were playing these maps one after the other, so that's good. We've got Harad. I mean, again, the armor piercing focus under normal circumstances makes them very, very dangerous, and it still will to a certain extent against Imladris, but their own weaknesses are going to be ruthlessly exploited by the elves if they're not careful. Sathron Warband are numerous. The armor piercing does prop them up in comparison to other lower end spears, but they're going to have to be on their game against the elves, otherwise they're going to die very quickly. Champions of Nefra are still a very dangerous unit though. They may not be as efficient against Lindon, but they're still going to be the sort of thing which can actually genuinely go toe-to-toe with a lot of the higher tier Imladris stuff. Southron Archers as well can skirmish. I mean, the Demons of the Desert are one of those really like show-stopping skirmisher units, which if you allow them to get one or two good volleys off, it can really turn the tide of a battle. The Demons of the Desert are kind of harder to use though, because they're very obvious, because they're a bigger unit, you can't hide them as easily, and you do need to get very close to the enemy, unlike some of the others. Like the Witches you need to get close, but they're even more devastating. The Iron Watch of Miramir, you can be further away. Blacklock Engineers, you can be further away, that sort of thing. So the Demons of the Desert, difficult to use, but there is a big reward to doing so correctly. Unupgraded Dismounted Serpent Guard. I mean, Serpent Guard actually are fairly decent as a line infantry unit goes if you have to try and combat the elves. Plenty of them. There's also some Trollmen over there, which of course have got that nice armour-piercing edge to them, as we keep mentioning, a ever-present really, any Harad army. And then we've got some Muhai Beast Hunters as well. Maybe another unit down here. Yeah, some Beast Masters. So some camels will be useful for potentially any sally outs that the defenders wish to make. Now then, we have rather weird sort of spread of units here, but we have Umbar here, played by Guardsman of Cadia, so this is a player that we haven't seen before, so good to see him. Trebuchet, always going to be useful in a siege situation like this, especially given that the terrain is what it is. The Trebuchet can circumvent a lot of the potential obstacles that other artillery may not. Ardenheim Shield Guard, I mean Umbar of course is one of those factions that do have quality on their side, so they can be a real bulwark in this regard for the attackers, because they won't be found wanting too much against the High Elves, at least certainly not in comparison to their allies today. Ardenheim Shield Guard, fully upgraded Balakith Marksman, and a unit of Corsair Blackguards as well, so they're going to be obviously well outfitted for skirmishing with the enemy. Interesting to see the Balakith Shield Bearers here in force. With the armour upgrade, yes, they're armour piercing, but armour piercing is not necessarily going to be as efficient. I mean, this is a situation where I think you'd want to dump all of your money possible into Alcarondas Legion, but he has brought them anyway. A couple of units of fully upgraded Balakith Axe Guard, and of course a unit of very dangerous Harbingers of Castamere here in the backfield. Then the 4th attacking army, you've already seen them slightly. We have Hertu Mihai with Mordor. We've got some Orc Fodder over here, some Orc Javelins, Orc Maulers on the front, as well as Moranal Infantry, so all of the more basic stuff. The Maulers of course have got the armour upgrade as well to try and keep them alive a little bit longer. I mean, they are capable of dealing damage, but they do melt away pretty fast. More Moranal Infantry back here, looking like a more elite-focused Mordor army, this. Not necessarily the end of the world, given Harad and Rhun's focuses already so far, however. And stuff like the Temple Guard, Temple Executioners, Nazgul, Olag Kai, they're all going to be pretty good if you can deploy them against the elves at the right moment. And of course the Blackguard of Barad-dûr are a worrying sight for any defending force, because it means you can't really be too relaxed whenever you dig in to a position that you hold. And Moranal Halberds, they may not be as good as the Gamperin, but you want to bring them with Mordor for the same reason. They're your only choice really if you want to anchor your front line in place with a Phalanx unit. And finally, last but by no means least, we have Decibel playing as Angmar, another new player by the looks of things. Guardians of Karn and Barrow Wights make for a very tanky front line indeed. Orc Fellas significantly less so, but they are very cheap, and ultimately, you know, they will be capable of dealing damage for their tier. It just depends on when they're committed and what sort of resistance they meet. We do have the Witchers alongside the Witcher and Blackguard and some Trolls here. So Witchers, defenders are going to have to be on their game again, because if they don't see the Witchers approaching, it's exactly the sort of thing which can devastate an army, especially the Elves, because the Elves tend to be smaller forces after all. Goblin Trackers, Blackwatch Legion. We've got some some unupgraded, I should say, Scourge Raiders, but again, throwing axes can be the sort of thing which can be very useful, especially against forces like Lindon. Goblin Trackers, some Angmar Marauders as well. I like this composition actually, a good mix of the upper end stuff, but still plenty of numbers, and also a couple more units of Orc Fellas out here on the flank. So, well considered that. We shall now move on to the defenders. I believe there will probably be a grace period in this particular matchup. I imagine what they're going to do is allow the Imladris players to get back into defensive shape. You can see this was a map that was added quite a long time ago. There are fortifications out here on the encampment as well, but not the sort of thing that an Imladris army can hold on their own if two of the attackers came towards them. So I think Darth over here is going to retreat alongside his allies. I mean, he does have the option, of course, of taking that long route around, which I think he should probably go for. If there isn't going to be a grace period, certainly, I think it's his only chance of getting back to the settlement without getting stopped. Elder Runway Archers and Noritano Warriors. I've said several times before, Imladris may be the least archer-focused of all the Elven factions. I mean, to be fair, there is a case for saying that Lindon are kind of on a level with them. The only reason I rate Lindon above them is because of the damage spike that Rangers can offer. But Imladris do have the God Halim, I suppose. But either way, they're still a fantastic archer faction. Any Elven faction is going to be that way inclined. God Halim are hiding. We have the Swords of Rivendell. We've got some upgraded Imladris Guardians. Of course, Imladris on the defense in a 5v3 is the only excuse they need to really splash the cash on their high tier units. Imladris Sentries are one such example of that. There are more Elder Renway in here as well. Elder Renway Spearmen, some Royden River Wards, Elder Renway Swordmass as well, Gwythi Arthand, Gwythi Rockdor, and Gwythi Myrdain. Nothing really surprising there. I mean, you're always going to bring the upper end units as Imladris, going as heavily into the archers as you can. Really the only thing is that one unit of Swords of Rivendell, which is really just to round out his numbers, I suppose. Now then, we shall see if his Imladris ally has decided to bring anything different at all. This is Adin Men. He has got some Gwythi Arthand as well, some Imladris Sentries, the Elder Renway in full force once more, some Noritano Warriors, some Archers of Rivendell, Another unit of Imladris Sentries, brought in River Wards, fully upgraded Imladris Guardians, an unupgraded unit of Imladris Guardians, so that is a difference. It's instead gone to upgraded Swords of Rivendell, which to be fair, do need it a little bit more if they're going to be more efficient. Also going for some Spears of Rivendell, which are a unit which can hold the line if they're supported properly. They're probably the most awkward unit of Imladris' infantry to use effectively though, because they are so vulnerable to missiles, unlike most of the rest of the faction. So we shall see. And also, we have a catapult crew here as well. So catapults on the defence, I mean, much like with the trebuchet on the attack, it can be really hit or miss the artillery in every sense of the word. So I mean, we shall see if it pays off for the defence. And finally, Winged Swordsman himself is playing as the Lindon army today, so some HARLINDON guard I should say. I'm sure there will be some Noldorin guard, and there they are down there. Obviously the Noldorin units, the one area where Lindon do have some really heavily armoured stuff. The rest of their army, however, is not so much, but their melee defense is fantastic, their damage is as well. Very good at combined arms as well, but they can only really make use of that as efficiently as they'd like on the defence like this, so we shall see if Winged Swordsman can do that. We've got some Mithlond Marines, we've got some Wardens of Elos Tyrian. Obviously with Imladris not having access to Rangers, a lot is going to be on the Wardens of Elos Tyrian given the current balance of the game. And 5v3 sieges like this, we shall see if they are enough for the defenders to lean on here. 4 Lindon Archers, Horse Lords of Ulmo once again. I mean, it is worth saying that the middle Imladris army didn't bring any cavalry, so 2 units of knights for the defenders to sally out with. Mithlond Pikemen, I did mention that Lindon have got some really good mid-tier pikes. HARLINDON infantry are here, the very strong Noldorin Blade Masters as well. More HARLINDON Guard, more Mithlond Marines, more Mithlond Pikemen and Mithlond Sword Masters, more Noldorin Guard, so yeah, you get the kind of thing here. A very efficient in melee, sort of mid-tier, backed up by some nasty skirmishes, especially the Wardens of Elos Tyrian and the Javelins that Lindon can have, the pikes being the basis of that, and then a few very high-end knights and Noldorin to help back things up as well. So we shall see how this goes. I mean, I will be making a cut because I have a feeling there's going to be a grace period to allow the Imladris players transit back to base. If there isn't, then it will be a small cut indeed, but we shall have to wait and see on that one, won't we? I shall rejoin when the battle is beginning. So the typical elven war cries are starting here and there across the field, and the Horse Lords of Ulmo are certainly thinking about making an initial charge into the Runic and Haradrim forces that are advancing down this narrow corridor. So I think we will rejoin here, which is maybe a little bit sooner than I was expecting to rejoin, given the nature of the grace period that I thought would be required. Guardsman Acadia is there. I believe it was this unit of archers that was initially firing. And we can also see that the artillery from the attackers also beginning to try and make an impression. These units that are back here in their very neat square formations, taking a little bit of damage. Fortunately for Adin Men, it's only on his units of Archers of Rivendell, but he really should be moving his units a little bit more dynamically than this. There's no need for these kind of infantry blocks. It is also good to see that one of the attacking armies is actually taking this long way around. Like I said, it's not a particularly appealing prospect to try and cross this bridge, especially given that Imladris are dug in a very nasty defensive position on the other side of it as well. So even when you do get across the bridge, this hill is also pretty terrible to try and get up, but you need to pressurise as many points as you can. So Mordor may be the sacrificial lambs here, but it is a role that does need filling. Now, the Horse Lords of Ulmo are going to retreat back, and I think that's kind of necessary really. You're going to need to try and use your cavalry late on, considering you didn't leave them out in the open field in the first place. Starting to see a little bit of initial skirmishing from the attackers as well. This is the sort of thing which can be very, very effective on Lindon, of course, and Lindon are the ones that are going to be taking ownership over this particular defence. You can see here that is Mithlond Pikemen on the front line as well from Winged Swordsman, and easy kills this. This is a bit of a problem. This is one of them, well, this is the main challenge of playing as Lindon in the first place. How can you mitigate this kind of damage that the opposing side is going to want to do to you? Basic though they may be, the Southron Archers, they're still going to be able to do the business here. Now you can see here 4 banks of Lindon Archers are going to be able to chuck out quite a lot of punishment downrange. That is the other side of the matter, of course. Lindon are capable of doing a lot of damage with their own archers. They're just not particularly good at withstanding enemy pressure, which is exactly where a unit like the Variag Mercenaries will come in very handy for the attackers. These strong warriors won't do too well under this kind of pressure. Most of the Haradrim won't either. You can see that the armies do extend back a fair way. Having a look here in the middle, which is where we shall find the forces of Umbar and of course Angmar. Pretty scary duo, actually. Angmar and Umbar both capable of bringing quite a lot of heavy infantry to the party. Goblin trackers taking a bit of damage. Interesting to see a few elements of the Lindon army over here as well. Of course, with the Lindon archers just up on the hill over there, the artillery also firing down. Goblin trackers are not too dangerous though, so I'm actually a little bit surprised perhaps that we're seeing a little bit of fire brought upon them. It is also interesting to see that Rhun are attacking right away rather than trying to take the very slow but kind of sure approach against Lindon of using all your ammunition on their front line first and foremost. They are going to try and move in here and do some damage. Scion Rim, heavy spears, but as long as the Lindon pikes hold their ground and as long as the Lindon line infantry is able to dish out a little bit of damage, even though the Scion Rim are a high tier unit, I don't think Lindon will be too worried. And also against something like the Eastron Warriors, this is exactly where the Lindon pikes are going to be very effective at dealing damage. Pikes are not known for dealing damage quickly, but on this occasion they should be just fine. A little bit further afield, Flag Rim marching slowly into place. There's some Eastron clansmen behind. Southron Warband are there as well. Still the several banks of archers going about their work. Victory seems certain for the Lindon pikes initially, but there's going to be plenty more where this came from an attacking perspective. I mean, the Flag Rim not going to be terribly effective against Lindon, well, terribly efficient. They may still be effective though in this kind of situation just for their enhanced survivability with that armour that they wear in comparison to the more basic Eastrons in front of them. Maces raised, they charge in. Mithlon Marines going to move forwards. A few volleys from the javelins first and foremost. And then of course they can double as makeshift line infantry as well, which may be needed given the pressure that the Lindon front line is already coming under. Throwing in just from behind. Going after the Gamprim is not a terrible idea. I mean, their pikes should be enough to outrange them anyway, but decent damage on the approach there. Noldorin Guard moving in as well. I mean, Noldorin Guard actually is one unit where the Flag Rim's armour piercing will actually come in handy, but the discrepancy in terms of quality there is so large that it's still going to be a pretty grisly battle, to be honest. Mithlon Marines have got a good angle as well into the Scion Rim. Units are actually shaken now with Mithlon Swordmasters coming in. They were actually forcing back the Lindon front line a little bit before the arrival of the heavy swordsmen. And also now with the javelin support, can't imagine this is going to last all that much longer. And then the Mithlon Marines of course can also get into melee as well, just in behind. Not a huge amount of archer support going on either. A bit of cover being afforded to the Southron archers here. But Lindon's still able to hit them. But again, the attackers won't mind too much that Southron archers are the ones taking the arrow fire. Meanwhile, having a look over here, Mordor starting to threaten to come across the river as well. Looks like the Norröna warriors have shot into the Mordor ranks a little bit, but as I said, it's going to be very difficult for Mordor to really start pushing through this area on their own. But taking the slower approach over here is what I would do. There's no need to rush against Imladris over here. When your allies start to make a little bit of progress, that's when you can throw yourself in. And even if you continue to lose in that sense, the defenders need to continue to keep up the defence against you. Meanwhile, where Rhun and Harad are moving in fairly quickly, that is not the case for Umbar and Angmar for the time being, but again, maybe that's not the worst idea considering the Goblin trackers are attracting a little bit of attention. Absorbing that ammunition is going to be important, because if the elves do not have that ammo later on, they're going to really struggle to carve their way through the quality and quantity that Angmar and Umbar can bring to the table as a duo. More Goblin trackers are moving forward as well. I mean, Orc Fellas moving to the front line, they're going to get ripped apart very quickly under arrow fire if they do take it, but again, not necessarily the most important target for the elves to be going after. Meanwhile, as we head across the hills, the front line for Rhun starting to fall apart on this section, but another unit of Scion Rim should help mitigate this problem somewhat. It's still, the Runic Assault is certainly still underway, you would have to say. It's not falling apart at the seams. And let's not forget as well, this is one of the roughest matchups for Rhun when it comes down to a pure melee engagement. Well documented that they do struggle against Lindon in this kind of environment. They are pretty reliant on their skirmishers winning the efficiency war in that sense. Meanwhile, these Beast Masters are taking an awful lot of damage from the enemy archers on the approach, or sort of almost waiting for their opportunity maybe to counter-attack. Not eager on allowing these Haradrim mounted javelins to get into a position to be effective here, the defenders. They are getting cut down pretty quickly, you'd have to say. Not great from their perspective. Still plenty of reinforcements though, so nothing to worry about just yet. The Scion Rim moving up. Still, however, the combination of Mithlond units and the Noldorin Guard able to keep Rhun at bay for the time being, but a little bit of a mass push coming in here, instigated by the Scion Rim. The Great Shield units are the ones that are more well known for doing this, but you'd have to say heavy spears are also capable, especially against a faction which is more lightweight in nature, like Lindon. I don't know whether they've got the ability to follow through on this account though. They may have dealt with the mounted javelins, but the dismounted Muhards here are in position, taking a little bit of javelin fire themselves, and any excess being absorbed by the Flag Rim as well. It's a pretty brutal fight so far, but Lindon are using their ranged resources at a fair rate of knots, to be honest, which could yet prove to be a bit of a problem for them later on. We shall wait and see. Beast Hunters doing their thing. Long Marines also back here. The second unit of them, and they have got a very nice angle into this part of the front line as well. Slaying Flag Rim and Southron Warband. Not the sort of thing which Lindon necessarily need much assistance with in terms of melee, but if you can kill them off more quickly. And so far it is looking like this is still the only really significant melee engagement. Angmar have moved their archers a little bit closer to the front line. Again, Angmar Marauders have moved forward, the Umbar Trebuchet crew having used up all of its ammunition. Angmar Marauders and Orc Fellows, but there still isn't a full-blooded assault. And Imladris will be able to turn them back relatively easily. I mean, the Orc Fellows, the armour piercing will help somewhat against the Imladris infantry, but not so much that it will be anywhere near enough to give the Orcs a victory there. Still, now that the attack is underway, a consistent stream of reinforcements is going to be required. How are Mordor getting along over here? They are making the initial attacks. Rhun on halberds moving forward in fairly decent shape actually, so the archers haven't ravaged them on the approach, but a combination of the basic Imladris units, when they have the terrain advantage, should be more than enough to deal with these initial Mordor incursions. A little bit further down the hill, Orc fodder moving forwards with the Morannon infantry. Of course, Mordor, I mean, by the nature of the bridge, they kind of have to take it slow as well, because they can't pour their entire army across the bridge too easily, based on Medieval 2 being what it is. A little bit surprised these archers of Rivendell are banking their shots in this manner against what are ultimately very, very basic units. This is a little bit concerning. In a 5v3, you do need to be efficient with your skirmishers, and I can't really say that any of the defenders have been hyper efficient with them so far. They've been very eager to use their ammunition, which is all well and good, but I don't know. We shall wait and see on that front. More Orc Fellas, not a lot of quality being committed to the front line here by the attackers. Again, that's fine to a certain extent, but you can often get more out of these kind of engagements when you can keep them going more easily without just throwing your fodder under the bus. The saving grace here, like I mentioned, is the fact the Orc Fellas may be able to deal a little bit more damage than your average infantry unit to the Imladris ones. And through sheer weight of numbers here with another unit of Fellas and Marauders, considering the pikes have already taken a little bit of damage as well, Imladris going to send down another unit of Guardians, which will end any hope the attackers had of moving through this area. Now, what about the most violent front line so far? The one that Lindon is marshalling. Still, we can see a lot of golden armour shimmering on the front line, and you have to say, Rhun are making slow but steady progress against Lindon, forcing the elves back. Perhaps their more lightweight nature here coming back to haunt them a little bit. Dragon's Wrath Guildsman, the balance of forces is evenly matched. Strong crossbows are there, Muhard and Beastmasters. Mounted mounted Serpent Guard getting onto the front line as well. They actually will be okay against Lindon. As part of a combined arms offensive, they'll be more efficient than the flag rim that they're fighting alongside. Some Imladris units over here as well, the Spears of Rivendell, perhaps sensing the fact that Lindon do need a little bit of support. Imladris have obliged. Not with one of their finest units, but it should be enough to maintain the defence for the time being. But you can see that the pressure is consistent here. And I think these units, are they not trapped? I don't think there's a way actually to get down from this little plateau up here. No, there isn't. So I mean, these units that have positioned themselves up on the hill, it's kind of a no-brainer really, because it gives you the elevation your skirmishers need, but there's nowhere for them to retreat to, so they need to use up all their ammunition and then essentially just throw themselves into melee afterwards. There's not a huge amount of the Lindon archers left either, and you have to say, that also gives the attackers a nice vantage point to shoot down into the heart of the settlement, so I think so far things have actually gone pretty well for the attackers, all things considered. Does it indeed? Yeah, I'd concur. I think based on, I mean, the attackers have taken losses, especially on this front, but across all of them it hasn't been smooth sailing for them, but it's all losses that would have been within budget for them, so to speak. Whereas the defenders may rue some of their earlier decisions to be as liberal with their skirmishers. In some cases they didn't have a choice, but in other cases I think they have been maybe a little bit too eager to play into the attackers' hands in that regard. Unit of Elder Enway Spearmen moving forward, I mean that's a significant unit for Imladris to commit. I mean this is the thing, the attackers on the other fronts do need to start now cranking up the pressure themselves, otherwise Imladris are going to be able to send over reinforcements to that front line. Which means that Rhun and Harad may be completely destroyed, and that would be a little bit of a disaster. So the other attackers do need to start working in tandem with their allies a little bit more. Corsair Blackguards using their throwing projectiles. Goblin Trackers in melee against Imladris Guardians is an extremely lopsided engagement, to say the least. With Long Pikemen back there. Martino Warriors moving backwards a little bit. Angmar Marauders also marching forwards. So still nothing too extreme. Scourge Raiders are throwing their throwing axes in. I'm amazed these Mithlon Pikemen are still alive, actually, considering the levels of punishment they've taken. It's a kind of thin on the ground defence back there as well, but the reinforcements are still a little bit far away. You can see how far that a lot of these stronger units perhaps have to march. You can see that Umbar even further back. That may prove to be a problem. These are the kind of things which may come back to bite the attackers. They are, in a 5v3, going to be able to afford a few more mistakes than the defenders are. So there's nothing to be worried about too much yet, but we'll see. Noratino Warriors getting into melee. This is one of the things they can offer, of course. They are a decent melee combatant, and certainly enough to help really bring the pain to the Angmar Marauders. Let's have a little look at what's happening over here. More Gamprim moving forward. Still a little bit more reinforcements, but I mean, it's not a limitless supply of infantry that Rhun have by any means, which is why they'll be hoping that not too much more of the Imladris forces will be committed forward. But based on the fact that these Lindon units, including the cavalry, are actually pulling back, I don't know, it may be that the defenders are abandoning this position, which may prove to be a mistake, I'm not sure. Javelin volleys coming in, flag rim, marching up here to try and finish off the Lindon resistance on this hill once and for all. Will be successful in that regard. Again, not Rhune's favourite matchup here, but they've actually done very well with the support of the South Runs. And there we have the Lindon forces routing under the weight of this engagement. The Guildsmen are actually a good choice against Lindon. And here you can see most of the Lindon units routing, even the Elder Enway Spearmen routing. It's a sign really of the overwhelming force, and without reinforcements approaching, a hopeless engagement to say the least. As the Muhards pour forward to consolidate those gains. And this is the problem now, because I just noticed the Serpent's Fangs in the background. They almost certainly still have a bit of ammunition. I don't know how much in terms of long-range scope. I mean, one unit of Eastron crossbows that still has ammo as well. Setting up on this position here is a problem for the defenders, because they can't really abandon this position. They're going to have to try and skirmish with the attackers when the attackers have superior terrain. Not a great situation for them to be in, which is why I personally would have funneled more Imladris reinforcements down this way earlier, which I thought is what they were going to be doing, but in the end, not true. And Angmar are now starting to increase the pressure a little bit over here. We're starting to see heavier units of infantry now. Guardians of Kandy. Another unit of Imladris Guardians, which may be enough to keep the defence going for the time being, but I don't know. Barrow White's on the way forward. I mean, that will mean that this attack is most certainly here to stay. I don't know how the defenders are going to reorganise themselves here, because they do need to. They've been a little bit too disorganised on their front lines, I think. The attackers have had more of a clear plan that they've stuck to than the defenders have had, I think, and that can really make a difference in the long run. Mordor have still made no progress, but they don't need to. And now, with completely clear shots for their Orc Javelins, the attackers really are coming up trumps really in all of their engagements to varying extents, which the defenders need to mount some sort of comeback soon, otherwise the disadvantages they find themselves at will start to mount into something that's unassailable. Round infantry moving uphill. I mean, to be fair, Imladris still haven't committed any fresh units to this front line, so and again, neither have Mordor really. It's been a bit of a slow burn of an engagement so far, but they can certainly move forward. I mean, just having a look, can they retreat further back into this settlement? I mean, these streets are narrow. The choke points may be useful later on when the armies are slightly smaller, but they can't retreat just yet, I don't think, otherwise they'll find themselves buffled up and won't be sufficient for them to win. Barrow White's taking a pretty hefty amount of damage from the God Helene. The God Helene are not the most damaging archer. They can knock Barrow Whites over, but the Barrow Whites will just get back up with their superior survivability, the ultimate tar pit, and even the Guardians of Carn-Dûm will be able to withstand a pretty decent amount of damage. This could be a bit of a turning point though, the catapult. And the catapult will most certainly be enough to kill off the Barrow Whites fairly quickly. It's enough to shake up the Guardians of Carn-Dûm as well, and there's a lot of high quality elven infantry still on the front line. Eager to still take the fight to this Angmar assault. A few throwing axes coming in. Balakith marksmen, so Umbar willing to support. They are trying to skirmish with the God Helene, but a multiple HP unit that's as heavily armoured as them, it'll take a while for the Balakith marksmen to crack through that. So I agree with the fact that the God Helene are just completely ignoring the Balakiths. Yep, these skirmishers are on the front line, but they can't shoot directly downwards. So this choke point will actually work out okay for the defenders as long as they can defend it a little bit better than they're currently managing, honestly. They need more infantry on this front line. Otherwise, the continued forward momentum of Harad and Rhun will continue. Excuse me. And that will only end in an attacking victory if they aren't able to stop the attackers from having things all their own way on this front line. They still have reinforcements, they're still able to maintain this assault for a little while as well. So it's not the sort of thing the defenders can hope will fizzle out of its own accord. Gamperim going to man the front lines as well. All sorts of Ulmo taking a few losses from skirmishers. So far the cavalry hasn't really come into its own. 2 units of defending cavalry, as we have seen. Maybe later on when things get stretched it's the sort of thing which can result in a comeback. Guardians of Carn-Dûm in superior numbers to the Imladris Guardians, but I'd still be surprised if the Angmar infantry was enough to win this fight outright. Maybe I'm wrong. Another unit of Norotino warriors being committed to the front. Guardians of Carn-Dûm being hit by the God Helene. Still those trolls in the background as well, which will offer a pretty scary damage spike. Imladris reforming their front line. Archers of Rivendell that are out of ammunition. Not the last word in terms of quality, but it's alongside their fellow elven archers in the Norotino and a few remaining swords and spears. It'll be enough to deal with a singular unit of Morannon infantry for the time being, and if need be, if a unit of genuine quality comes forward, there's always the Broinen River Wards and the pikes that they can commit as well. And so far Mordor haven't committed any of their genuinely scary stuff, but then like I said, this is the right way for Mordor to play this, really. Given the nature of the position they have to try and storm. And, you know, Untitled Warriors. I mean, there's not a lot of reinforcements close by, though. If Mordor wanted to mount an all-out assault now, maybe they could do so. I mean, Olag High is maybe the initial signs that they're thinking about doing that. I don't know, Rhun and Rewards would be pretty decent against trolls, but with the amount of numbers that Mordor could bring to an assault like that, it could get pretty messy. What's going on over here? All sorts of Ulmo charging into a position that is being overrun now. Trolls are being committed to this front line. Trolls of Gundabad, their spiked clubs raised. I mean, they need to be a little bit careful they don't get skewered by trolls, but another maybe misjudgment perhaps by the defenders is trying to commit these pikes now, because as good as the elven pikes are, trolls are going to be pretty good at cutting them down to size before they're ever able to really get themselves set up on the front line. And while there are still a few Imladris Guardians, there's not many of them left. And this is where having the reinforcements from an attacking perspective so far away is actually a bit of a problem, because if they had their reinforcements closer, they could really take advantage of this now and overwhelm this elven defence, and that momentum shift I don't think would be the sort of thing the defenders could recover from. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I don't think so. Blackwatch Legion getting towards the front lines as well. Catapult volleys forthcoming. God, Halim, are they out of ammunition? Their presence on the front line I don't think would be enough to stabilise things at this point, so Imladris may actually be committing units to what is ultimately a lost cause. In comes the charge from the Whitey Rockdoor and the Vorswords of Ulmo. I mean, there's so few elves on the front line at this point that this could be effective. Trolls have taken a few losses. Surely with the Blackwatch Legion on the front line, any attempt to salvage this front line at this point is not going to be successful, but with the catapult right there, good damage is still possible. Now then, what about over here? They have been stopped dead in their tracks over here. Rhun and Harad, which, like I said, was very necessary for the defenders, otherwise they would have been doomed. A couple of units of Imladris Guardians can also be committed, but at this point Rhun and Harad, all they need to do is maintain their presence on this front line, tie up all of this infantry, and then Mordor, Angmar and Umbar can start doing some of the heavy lifting in this fight. There are trollmen on the front line though, which is all well and good. Champions of Nafra are in here as well. They won't be quite as domineering, this kind of unit, as they could be against the Gondorians, as we saw last time out. But they will still be pretty good. They're one of the Harajam units which can go toe-to-toe with a lot of what the elves have to offer. Pikes being committed to the front line now as well. Still those strong crossbows trying to get a good shot, but they're not really going to be able to. I mean, they've done a lot of damage to those Wardens of Elos Tyrion, which is a huge loss for the defenders as well. It's been the story of this battle so far, really. I don't think the defenders have done anything individually catastrophic, but slowly but surely, systematically, the attackers have been making good calls where the defenders have been making bad calls, and this is the sort of thing which I don't think they're going to be able to recover from. Olag High on the front line, like I said, Rhun and Riverwards will do okay against them, but the Olag High will do quite nicely against the Pikes. Nazgul are on the front line as well, so Mordor stepping things up as well. Is this the sort of thing that the elves are going to be able to withstand? Temple Guard. Warriors trying to fire over, but I don't think you're going to be able to do a morale shock with your flaming arrows here. Mordor simply have too many numbers, and they are in the ascendancy. Maulers heading to the front line as well. If they get in and amongst these more armoured Imladris units, they'll make a good foil for the Nazgul and Olag High. What? Over here. Nice V-shaped formation. I mean, this is one area maybe where the defenders can take a little bit of solace. I don't know necessarily if Rhun and Harad are going to be able to withstand this kind of pressure. Strong crossbows are reloading. I mean, this is maybe a little bit more out of desperation that the Wardens of Alos Tyrion have revealed themselves, try and kill off Rhun and Harad as quickly as possible, because surely now that they are visible again, the Eastron crossbows are going to shoot them. Nasty stuff. God Helene. Darthy Darth. Moving over here, still plenty of reinforcements. I mean, Demons of the Desert are trying to do their thing. It's not the easiest angle they have, but any hits that they do score, given the situation is what it is, will be most welcomed, I'm sure, by the attackers. Now then, elsewhere, what do we have here? Guardians of Kandy. Oh, looks like the Witchers were present at some point. I'm not sure whether that was entirely necessary, to be honest. I mean, the Witchers are here. But they could be dismantled by Winged Swordsman with his Horse Swords of Umbar. That probably was the Harad general, given the presence of the champions of Nafarat on that front line. Again, something for the defenders to cling to. Maybe morale shocks are possible, and then they can consolidate around different choke points quite through Rockdale. This is where the cavalry can come in useful, though. Things are a little bit stretched. The fact that a lot of the reinforcements are still fairly far away. All sorts of Ulmo have routed in the attempt of trying to kill the Witchers, and now the Witchers, I assume, are going to try and grill the Gwathi Rockdale. Charging downhill, but this is where the cavalry has to be useful, really, to justify its presence on the field. I'm not sure the Horse Swords of Ulmo paid for themselves. If they killed the Witchers, yes, but they didn't. What have we got going on here? Orc Maulers routing. Point blank flaming shot. Not many Olag High remaining. Elder Enway Swordmasters being pulled off the front line, maybe chasing down the routing unit, which is a little bit of a problem. They need to get back on the front line where they belong. Mordor's assault maybe losing steam a little bit, but I think that's got more to do with the fact that they're just positioning their units. I mean, it's probably a good thing for the sake of the battle that Mordor aren't in a position to take advantage of the low elven numbers that are still present on this front line. Otherwise, I think we'll be seeing a rather one-sided affair. The elves could still recover from this if they can kill off Rhun and Harad quickly, and then refocus their efforts against the two Orcish factions and Umbar. Which I mean, Harad and Rhun are struggling. They did a lot of the... They claimed the momentum for the attackers earlier on. They're being made to pay for it now. That was pretty brutal though. Demons of the Desert now able to find a gap. Damage being done to the elves. Further back, how much in the way of reinforcements they still have left? A little bit. Not much though. And not much of it is of really high quality, not the sort of thing which would break the back of an elven defence. He's trying to dance around here to try and mitigate the damage of the Demons of the Desert, but he failed miserably at doing that, unfortunately for him. And we are seeing an example here of the elves claiming the edge on a front line, but not pushing through the front line quickly enough to shut down the Demons of the Desert, and that damage is just the latest in a long line of things which the attackers have been doing better than the defenders. At this point, I think the defenders will be reliant on their elven quality to try and carry the day, but I'm not sure they've got enough of that left necessarily. Ardenheim Shield Guard moving forward, forming up a pretty nasty front line. 3 units of them is a lot. It's a lot of locked morale units, not necessarily very damaging, but it's the sort of thing which the defenders are going to need to be able to kill off in their entirety. Have these units seen combat? They have. A little bit bloodied. Maybe they've just been shot by something. Wardens of Alos Tyrion in position. They'll be waiting for those reinforcements to get forward. I mean, that is maybe the one thing the attackers could have done better. Umbar, Angmar and Mordor could have had their reinforcements closer to the front line, but in the end I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference. What very little remained of the elven defenders. Easy prey for a mass push from the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, and the Temple Executioners and Orc Maulers falling in behind as well to consolidate any gains Mordor make. The Imladris sentries are still standing, which is something, but it's not going to be enough. Further downhill, Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Is that so? The Rhun and River Wards doing their thing. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. That will actually switch around when the Rhun and River Wards face the Blackguard 1-to-1 in an isolated case, but that's not going to be the case as the Temple Executioners, Moran on Halberds, also moving their way forwards now. There was an inevitability about this, but yeah. What have we here? Gwaith some routing units still in behind enemy lines. Balakith Marksmen moving forward as the vanguard, with the Ardenheim Shield Guard following them in. Balakith Marksmen are of course going to struggle against Elder Enway class units, especially the Swordmasters, with the damage that they're capable of kicking out. That is going to be an Elven Catapult crew, isn't it? Just charging onto the front line, trying to offer more numbers. I mean, the thing is, those reinforcements from Umbar are still a long way away. If they can isolate and destroy this army, if they can continue to maybe be victorious against Harad and Rhun, maybe then they can reform themselves against Mordor, but that relies really on Mordor not arriving before that is the case, and it's going to take longer to kill off these armies anyway, and I think actually they've had to siphon off some resources over here. There's still a unit of Elder Enway Spearmen not doing a great deal. They need to be committed at this point. All units need to be committed. I don't think it's going to be enough for the defenders either way. I think as we move closer towards the final 10k frames and what will ultimately be the last push from the attacks, I would assume. There goes Círdan. Lindon General falls. That was quite cinematic. I think the attackers have got too much of an edge to be victorious here. I mean, there's still some high quality units, of course. Rhun's Velos Tyrion are still alive. Arch of Rimdale, but now also the Gwaith Myrdain, who of course will be very dominant against the vast majority of Angmar and infantry that they're going to be facing off against. In fact, all of them really. That final troll will also fall away as well. Ardenheim Shield Guard are here in such numbers that they'll do okay against the Elder Enway, even if they don't necessarily have the damage values to go toe-to-toe with them on a one-to-one basis. This will change matters fairly significantly, however. Witcher and Blackguard adding that much needed quality to the front line to make it a bit of a foregone conclusion, really. Over yonder we have pretty nasty close range volley there from the Orc Javelins. Gwaith the Arthand, however, will close them down without taking really many losses. Orc Javelins will struggle against that. The Runic General falls. Maybe that'll be enough to finally break up that assault, but those two players over there certainly did their job. Imladris still fighting to the bitter end. There's actually 2 units of Gwaith the Arthand over here, so maybe not a foregone conclusion for Mordor. They need to get all of their units that are across those bridges over there still into battle. Maybe Orc fodder, but everything is needed. It would surprise me if the attackers capitulated from this point, but I mean, anything's possible, I suppose. It would be a remarkable recovery, and also a testament to Elven quality, like I said. Over here, let's have a look, shall we? Yeah, those Elder Enway Spearmen on the front line have made it so that this is going to be an Elven victory, you'd assume, unless those E-Strong crossbows can get some really nasty volleys. One of the attacking armies is gone, which has to be Harad. So they are the first army to completely die, but they've done their job. I mean, as we are near enough to the final 10k frames, as we have a look, the Elves are still 7% behind. It's very difficult to recover from this sort of situation as the defenders. It's not impossible. I mean, if you do have the quality to do so, you can do it, but Gwaith Myrdain, victory seems possible. Victory seems certain, I should say. I mean, in terms of bodyguard infantry matching up against one another, they do trade favourably with the Blackguard, but it's just a question of sheer weight of numbers at this point, which if those Umbar units committed forward, now the defenders would have no chance, but they are being given maybe the faintest glimmer of hope. I still don't think it's enough, but the elves will give a good fist of it, I'm sure. Ardenheim's shield guard, in the way the Scion Rim did earlier on, trying to push in into close quarters, although on this occasion against the Elder Enway that isn't really going to help their cause much. But oh well. Temple Executioner's defeat is almost a certainty. Javelins are there. Wythiarthan's still here. I mean, the Blackguard of Barad-dûr are reinforcing this front line, but things have gotten maybe a little bit more pear-shaped here for Mordor. They've still got something like the Temple Guard. If they've got ammunition, they can shoot down into these units. Temple Executioners fighting isolated against the Elder Enway Spearmen and Broigan Rewards. The Mordor unit should be okay, but it'll take them a while to crash through these Elder Enway. Spears, heavy spears in general, are very difficult to kill, and of course the Elder Enway among the most difficult to kill. Perhaps the most difficult to kill are the Wythiarthan, bodyguard tier unit there. This is going to be fairly brutal though. Trying to get his Black Numenorian steel bows into a position where they can be very effective. I mean, this is maybe the problem that the elves are facing. They have managed to force Mordor into more of a stalemate here, but all of the units they're doing so with are spears, so they're not really able to kill Mordor as quickly as they would like to be doing. Actually getting into melee here, the Temple Guard. Maybe they don't have as much ammunition as I thought. Temple Guard should help Mordor, but I don't know. It's not that much on the front line here. It's going to be down to those Umbar reinforcements to really carry the day, you would suggest. Flag run routing. Eastron crossbows still there, as well as the guildsmen, but the elves are not going to be drawn into Mevon's game. They are going to retreat. And it's still over here, so this is actually turning into a far close game, and reinforcements being too far away. It has turned into being far more of a danger to the attackers' chances of winning this game than I initially thought it was going to be. 20 Gwaithir Myrdain are still alive. Where are they? 8 God Helene firing on the approach. I mean, there are the Witchers. They do blend in somewhat, and one volley from the Witchers would be enough here, I think, to take the hope that the defenders suddenly have and crush it very cruelly underfoot. God Helene still shooting at those units on the approach, hoping to do what damage they can. Mordor's general falls. It's a lot of Wythiarthan. I mean, a morale shock against Mordor now is most certainly not impossible. And I think the Wardens of Elos Tyrion also sense that, which is why they're over here and not manning the walls against the most substantial attacking force that still remains. And there is a lot of routing going on. Around on halberds, all of the basic Mordor units are now gone. Temple Guard. They will stand and fight to the bitter end, so that's something which Mordor have. They will at least be able to maintain a presence over here until their army is completely destroyed, but they, like Rhun at this point, can only really be an annoyance. Rhun may be a more effective annoyance because they still have some ammunition in these crossbows, which if left unattended could be the sort of thing which puts the game beyond the defenders at this point. Malekith marksmen have managed to get in behind enemy lines. One of the Imladris generals falls on that front line. And the Gwaithir Myrdain are still on this front line, utilising their warhammers to good effect. The loss of the Angmar in general would be significant, but I don't know, I still think that the amount of Umbar reinforcements that are here, delayed though they may be, should be enough to carry the day for the attackers. You would imagine. Witches are here, but they're going to be hunted down by the looks of things. Elder and my swordmasters are wavering now. It's a bit of a risky situation. Eastron crossbows, I mean, yeah, this is a bit of a problem. Again, maybe a little bit of an error in judgment here by the defenders. If they'd just left some units over here to prevent the Eastron crossbows from doing this, But instead, these Eldraenway Spearmen are going to get last samurai, and the defenders will need everything they have in order to be able to be victorious in this fight. Valakith Marksman hunting them down as well, so that should be the end, really, of those Eldraenway. Some very scattered remnants of Elven defenders at this point. Blackguard finishing the Eldraenway Swordmasters off. What remains of the Elven front line finally being smashed by the Umbarim advance. So the Imladris forces over there that are ultimately going to be victorious against Mordor will be the ones making the last stand, but like I said, I really don't think most of them made up of spears. Umbar have got Harbingers, Balakith Axguard, high damage units, which should be enough to finish off already battle-wearied Elven units, and also the Elves are not really being as efficient as they could be over here against the Temple Guard. They're not bringing overwhelming force to bear against them, and they're losing Elves unnecessarily again. Another example, perhaps, of relatively poor decision-making by the defenders. And the one big question mark against the attackers of their reinforcements being a little bit stretched, a little bit far away, I don't think is going to be enough ultimately to take victory away from them. Warns Valos Tyrion doing the right thing here with the swordsman by trying to surround them. I don't think the Warns Valos Tyrion will be enough to turn this battle around, but maybe. One or two of them do fall under the charge. The Warns themselves also taking damage. The Orc fodder that was back there is now here, but almost immediately routs in the face of the Elven resistance, given the loss of the General. Mordor don't really have anything in the way of staying power anymore with their low tier units. What's going on over here? Is there still Temple Executioners? Is that why? Yeah, still 7 Temple Executioners. This is the problem. I'm trying to deal with these Mordor units is Temple Guard are routing, Temple Executioners, maybe they can at least put on a unified front against the advancing attackers, who at this point have pretty much secured most of the settlement, you'd have to say, at this point. Valakith Marksman on the advance. Lindon and Imladris over here gone. The God Helem being finished off by what remains of the Blackguard and some tattered remnants of Khan Doom Guardians. Also the Witchers, who may be out of ammunition at this point because they are just being used in a similar manner to how the Nazgul would be used. Again though, the Umbar reinforcements may be a little bit lagging behind. Unified front is what's needed. As I mentioned, I don't think it's going to prove to be too much of a concern. Still, the gap remains the same. Will ultimately be within 10% this, which the hallmark in an 8-player battle of any battle being pretty close, and how different decisions could certainly have sent it the other way. But as I mentioned, I'd be extremely surprised if from here the attackers were able to mount any sort of victory. These strong crossbows, Mevon going after the enemy with some crossbow bolts, trying to soften them up. Need to take cover here. Add in men, and Darth with a single unit of Gwaithie Arthur, maybe go into the corner of the settlement, but the problem is if they do so, it's very long sight lines for these strong crossbows to take advantage of. All they need to do really is surround the elves at this stage, which is why we're up to ×2 speed, because at this point it's just a game of cat and mouse between the elves and these crossbows by the looks of things. We'll try and counter-attack forwards, but in so doing, yet again, they're going to take terminal losses on the advance, you would assume. These Orc fodder have returned from routing yet again. Still some Temple Executioners as well, so Mordor still maintain a presence on the field in much the same way that Rhun and Angmar do. Very battered remnants, but it's really those Umbar units which put this beyond all hope. As the Orc fodder charge in, trying to overwhelm these elves. Are they going to rout in the face of the Eldraenway? Probably. Oof, yeah, and this is the issue. Like, having these crossbows left in the late game has been very, very useful. Warns Valos Tyrion revealing themselves. They don't have any ammunition left at this point, of course. We've already seen them engage in melee with Temple Guard, which is not a move you would do with rangers that still have ammunition left. Umbar once again being very slow on the uptake, will give the elves a bit of time to rounds of defence. Ooh, yeah. The Witchers still have a volley or two left. It doesn't really matter too much, like I said, it doesn't really matter how slow Umbar are being, the elves aren't going to be able to recover from this at this point. They don't have the damage dealing capabilities, they're battle weary. And yeah, 6% though, managed to close the gap just a little bit. Very strange and slow approach that. Eastern crossbows going after the Horns of Elos Tyrion. You don't wipe the Arthand. Not sure what they're doing, going after the Temple Executioners perhaps. Balakith Marksman. I mean, they are going to be able to rack up a decent little kill count here against the units that have been committed forward. Umbar, one of these players, I've never seen this name before, but certainly you would say based on the tactics, certainly one of these save your elite units for the end types, which I'll say till I'm blue in the face. Very often that is not the mindset to have. And we saw exactly why not with how successful Rhun and Harad were with claiming the initiative early on in this battle, with stuff like Scion Rim, fairly expensive heavy spears, being the first committed to the fight. And that, to me, tells you all you need to know. Right, the Arthand is shaken. That's a Lock Morale unit. Would that be Mordor by any chance? Yes. Orc fodder leaving the front line in disgrace. I don't get the appeal of keeping your elite units at the back of the end anyway. It means that their kill counts in the end are going to be pitiful. The Harbingers have got literally 0 kills. You know, if the Harbingers don't get committed to the front line, maybe the Glythe Arthand could withstand this. I mean, it's unlikely, to be honest, given the armor-piercing nature of these units. I think Umbar will be fine. And they are doing the right thing here by surrounding the unit and not allowing the spears to simply keep them at arm's length with their shield wall, but it is what it is. Meanwhile, Umbar units also marching down this way. Oh yeah, look at this. Alcaron Last Legion in another section. So yeah, it was always going to be an impossibility for the elves, but again, it's one of those situations where things could have been very different. They could have been. Units peeling off. This is going to be the end, so having a look at the final, yeah, 7%, which does seem about right, all things considered. Umbar, really the only ones with an army left. Rhun may still have those E-strong crossbows, but other than that, Umbar, I guess, will get to claim ownership over this settlement by virtue of being the only ones with units left on the field. And there we have it.
Though defeat is ours on this day, we have nothing to be ashamed of. It's but a cruel twist of fate that snatched victory from
If you say so. I mean, I still think the defenders made too many rods for their own back here. I think the reluctance of Umbar to reinforce as quickly as they could have been able. I mean, you see here, only 215 kills is a sign that they didn't really do much until the late game, and even then, it was relatively slow. If the Elves had played better throughout the game, I think they would have been able to take real advantage of that, and they would have been able to win the game. Unfortunately, however, a few too many missteps throughout in terms of their defence, initially against Rhun and Harad, and then later a little bit too messy against Angmar. Primarily Angmar, but also a few elements of the Umbar force as well, and that extended to Mordor. Mordor knew exactly when to commit themselves forward when Imladris were a little bit thinner on the ground. Imladris did go back to reinforce that front line, but by then Mordor had already done a pretty decent amount of damage to the elves that had been left behind as a rear guard. All of the things I said throughout are the reasons why, and the elves put it beyond themselves, really, to be able to try and make that unlikely but possible late game recovery given the way that Umbar had played. Let's see what did the damage for Lindon. A lot of damage by the looks of things. So Noldor and Blade Masters doing well on the front line in spite of the fact they did tend to blend in. We didn't really see them when we were casting. We did see the Noldor Guard and they performed in a very similar manner. So the high tier Lindon stuff doing well. HARLINDON infantry doing well in some cases, not quite so well in others. Same with the Mittelon Sword Masters. The Pikes, they did okay. They acted as a fairly decent anchor initially, but when Rhun and Harad really stepped things up, they started to struggle a little bit more, you'd have to say. Horns of Elos Tyrion, in spite of being savaged by those E-strong crossbows, they still managed to break 500 kills, which is exactly what you need to see as the defenders, given the current meta of the game. HARLINDON Guard here, 4 Lindon Archers also, and some Horse Lords of Ulmo. I mean, they didn't do too badly, but ultimately you have to say the cavalry from the defenders needed to do a little bit better if they were going to be able to claim the advantage here. But yeah, like I said, this battle, bit of a weird one in the way that it was defined really by the mistakes of certain players, but I do think that the attackers, they made good calls throughout, with the exception maybe of Umbar being as slow as they were. I don't want to harp on too much because it's a name I haven't seen before and it's probably a slightly fresher player. But again, in the end, the attackers weren't punished for that because the defenders were unable to, because of their own disorganisation problems, shall we say, throughout the battle, as it were. But it is what it is. I think the attackers just about were the worthy victors on this occasion. So big thank you to Winged Swordsman 44 for sending through another replay. We're getting through them at this point. I think I've got 3 left from him at this point, as well as a couple from Sin of the Dark Cloud as well, so plenty of replays still to come. Like I mentioned, probably going to be seeing some... well, we will be seeing the Return of the Bracket style battles when I'm able to, when I'm not basically on the verge of being sent away at any given moment. I'll be able to record another 1 or 2 of them, because that one went down pretty well and I would have been able to do them more regularly, but again, life is what it is at the moment. Efficiency is what I have to do to basically keep the channel going along at its current pace, like I mentioned. And we will be going into a little bit more detail on what may or may not be happening in a live stream channel update again at some point in the month of June is what I intend, as long as I have a little bit more of a concrete answer of what I'm going to be doing at that point. If not, then it'll be July, but I've kind of got a better idea now of the various things that could be happening. I've kind of distilled it down really into 3 distinct options, all of which in the long run should be good for the channel, but it's just a matter of when these things actually come into play. But again, we'll talk about that in the update when it comes along. And I won't keep harping on about it in the splash screens at the end of these battles. But big thanks to all the players, and a special thanks to Winged Swordsman 44 as well for supporting the channel so readily in the past month or so. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.